Reactive Training Systems.
Hey everyone, welcome to the RTS podcast. This week we have Bryce Krawczyk, who's hanging out with me. Bryce recently competed at CPU Nationals, and while there he competed both equipped and raw competitions separated by one day. So we talked with him about what it was like to train up for a dual competition. You know, what is your training like when you are preparing for something like that? We go into, some specifics about the equipped training, some specifics about the raw training, what it's like to peak, and just kind of some of the peaking strategies that we use with some of our athletes and how that differs from kind of what you may have heard, in more common sources. Then we get into a little bit of a discussion on core work and upper back work, kind of a discussion where Bryce and I may not see perfectly eye to eye, which since we work together, it was kind of challenging to find a subject where we don't, generally agree on things. So this one still is, I would say, general agreement, but there's some more nuance that we have some different approaches. So we explore those and discuss those a little bit. Before we get into that, I do want to mention real quick that we are starting up another RTS classroom. This one is Classroom Mesocycles. So Mesocycles is a class that's focused on teaching you to develop really great training mesocycles. We cover periodization strategies. So we'll talk about linear periodization, block periodization, polarized training, and so on and so on. We'll talk about making strategy combinations so that you can build your own training strategy. And the idea is that by the end of the class, you can develop your own training mesocycle that is a combination of whatever strategies will work best for you, and that it should fit into a larger framework of annual and multi-year planning. So we'll teach you how to do all these things. And I get questions a lot of times on what books do I recommend for learning programming and things like that. And the sad truth of it is that there's not a lot out there that I feel teaches you a practical system for implementing training programming from the ground up. There are a lot of books that will teach you some really super basics about programming that you probably already know. There are also some books out there that will teach you some high-level advanced conceptual stuff, but it's difficult then to apply that to what are you doing currently right now. And the whole intent behind RTS Classroom is to teach you a process for how to implement this stuff. So if you're interested in something like that, go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and then click on Classroom. The one that you're looking for is Mesocycles. We're also spinning up another class, Technical Mastery for Powerlifting. That one's taught by Dr. Rory Alter. You can check that one out as well. So if you need help with your technique, if you're wanting to learn how to improve your own technique, coach technique better, check out that class as well. There's a discount available for multiple enrollments that you'll all see right there at store.reactivetrainingsystems.com. And yeah, just wanted to mention that before we get going here in our conversation with Bryce Krawczyk. Now bringing you Bryce Krawczyk.
Training less frequently with less intensity, doing less specific stuff is a blessing right now. I'm pretty happy about that.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, it's that last meet cycle that you did was a pretty intense ramp up, right?
Yeah, well, I had a couple injuries actually. Like I kind of dinged up my shoulder a couple weeks out. I don't even know what happened. I had a couple of great bench days, and then right after I had a really, really good day in my shoulder just like seized. And we were traveling at the time, and I could barely kind of like hold my luggage underhand because my rotator cuff was just like really not having it. And that set me back a fair bit from like what I felt like was a lot of really good bench progress. So it was a bit of a bummer, but
yeah, I suppose those things do tend to happen. But that was, I guess, training up for doing a dual meet. Raw and equipped, basically in the same competition. What, they were separated by a day or 2 days?
It was the next day.
Wow. So not
Yeah, so I
separated by
competed equipped
24 hours.
Friday. Yeah, competed equipped Friday, like I think 1:30, and then raw Saturday at 9:30 or 11, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
And
See, I
like
thought for some
two
reason I
different
was thinking
athletes
there was a
coached
day
in between.
between there, but yeah.
It was quite the
Well,
weekend.
yeah. So how did you feel after that? Like, did you feel beat up at all? Like, what's
My body didn't feel bad. Like I went out drinking right afterwards, which is probably like after doing something like that, your body's like, okay, we need to hydrate, we need to rest, we need to eat some good food. And I did the exact opposite and went out drinking with the rest of the Canadian powerlifting people till all hours of the morning, and that was, I don't think, my body's favorite thing that I've ever done. But it was like one of those things. It was just such a release to, like, there was so much build up to this meet. Um, and it's just so cool to see everybody there, and you get kind of caught up in the fun of it. And the next thing I knew, it was Sunday, and it was Sunday, and we had to travel all day, and it was a bit groggy.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine so. It's kind of it's a very powerlifter thing to do, I think, because like all throughout the year we're like, yeah, don't drink, or at least don't drink that much, and
Yeah,
and go to bed early and eat decent food, eat plenty of food at least,
yeah,
and then like the 2 or 3 times a year that you have these bigger competitions, guys just tend to go blow it out that night afterwards.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
mean, it makes sense, right? If you're going to, training wise,
yeah,
that's where it's going to have the minimal impact on anything else that you're doing.
yeah,
But
exactly, exactly.
it's just kind of funny. It's definitely a powerlifter sort of style, I guess.
Yeah, but in terms of the body, like I honestly didn't feel beat up heading into the second day. I think some things showed through in my performance, maybe that, maybe wouldn't have been there, maybe would have been a little bit stronger. Um, but I didn't necessarily feel that going in. So, yeah, I mean, the body held up well. It was just, you could definitely see the effect of having competed the day before.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So we kind of went ahead and got things rolling right away. But for people who don't know you, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Bryce Krawczyk. I own and operate a training company called Calgary Barbell. I'm a competitive powerlifter. I've been lifting for about 5 years now, and been able to enjoy some success in the sport, which I'm pretty proud of. I came in second place at IPF Worlds last year, won North Americans the year before that, claimed a world record, open world record deadlift at that meet, and won best lifter at that meet. And then just recently won my second and third national championships here in Canada, competing equipped and raw, back to back. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, I'd definitely say it was pretty cool. Um, it seems like that's more of a thing that I guess I've seen it more at the Arnold than anywhere else. People doing like multiple competitions in the same weekend.
Mhm.
I definitely think it's cool. What would you say is kind of the biggest challenge to doing that? Um, Competing raw and equipped, basically in the same meet.
I think being torn with your training a little bit. Like I think for me, I tended to put a little bit more into those equipped sessions. I tended to be a little bit more aggressive in my loading, or a little bit more aggressive in my psyche. And then I would often have to, like it's a balance. So if that goes up, this side has to kind of take a bit of a hit. So it was tough to try and maintain, an adequate amount of focus and intensity on both aspects of training at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, that balance is definitely difficult. How did you account for, like, on the second day? Did
Mm.
you account for having competed in the first competition in your game plan at all?
Not originally, but by the time I, I think it was by the time I went to bed that night, the night of the equip meet, the Friday, I had it set in my head that I was going to lower my squat opener about 20 kilos. And I ended up taking for my third what I had originally planned to open with on my raw
Oh,
meet.
really?
And I mean, who knows? It might have been there, it might not have been, but I think it was the right move. And yeah, going in, it was like, okay, I got to make sure because there was some stiffer competition for sure in the raw division. In the equipped, it was just not as populated. It was another good buddy of mine who was his first meet, and then a guy who missed 93 by like half a kilo.
Yeah.
Whereas the raw meet were, you know, guys that have been training as 105s all year. So it was, yeah, I think it was important to make sure that I adjust my game plan and also my expectations in terms of like what I would be capable of.
Yeah, I imagine that would be a pretty big thing to deal with as well, just kind of that adjustment of expectations.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and
go ahead.
I think even just going in, like I said, I had put a little bit more focus on my equip meet, and that was kind of what I expected out of the meet too, was to get a little bit better performance on my equip day than my raw day. And kind of more let the chips fall where they may with the raw stuff.
Yeah. I think that's how I would do it too. That's at least how I would prefer to do it. You know, you put the higher priority competition on the first day, you know, if at all possible. I mean, obviously for a lifter, you're not in charge of the scheduling of the meet. So, you know, you deal with what you can, but you know, for that to be a viable thing, I think having that more important competition on the first day is an important thing. You know, yeah. So that's pretty neat. I think that's cool. So I would like to dig into kind of some discussions of your training a little bit more. I think that's really interesting. It's novel in a lot of ways too, and hopefully something to be learned from that. So I guess let me kick it back to you to begin with, and hopefully this is not too weird because you and I work together on training stuff. But just for some kind of general overview to get us started, do you want to kind of relate what your training was like, in particular this last training block as you were training up for Canadian Nationals?
Sure. I think it would be, and I mean, maybe you can correct me if I'm off point here because you were the one who designed it, but it seemed like it was almost because it was two focuses. It was almost like two sort of training blocks happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Maybe they were just sort of cut in half. So you had like training block 1 priority top down, training block 2 priority top down. Some of that bottom priority stuff for each side or each focus was maybe trimmed off a little bit. So I would start my week with what was my favorite session of the week, which was like a full equipped squat and a full equipped bench. And that was the whole day. Like I would just work up, get into my stuff, single, set of 5, 4, whatever in the gear. And then I think it was my raw deadlift and some secondary bench movements. And then supplemental day Wednesday, because I was having trouble fitting everything into 4 sessions. And then more equipped stuff towards the end of the week. But it was very much, there was intensity and volume towards each end of the spectrum. So it was kind of cool to be able to, you know, every day I was coming in and doing a big lift pretty much, working up to a single either in the gear or raw. And that was a lot of fun to be able to kind of push in both directions at once.
Yeah. So four sessions a week, basically, with a pretty big single in there. You know, that's, you know, that's not common at all, really, at your level, at least. I mean, I know a lot of people do kind of squat every day type of stuff and daily maxing. Even I've heard of people who do daily maxing for all 3 lifts, but I've never heard of it happening at a high level. Now, I don't want to kind of give any sort of mischaracterization. Like, we weren't really doing daily maxing. So those singles were singles at an 8 RPE. So 8-ish, slightly heavier than your opener, you know? Yeah. What they're supposed to be, right?
Yeah. The target was an 8.
Yeah, target's an 8. 8.5 a lot of times, you know, I know how that goes. I lift weights too. But yeah, I like what you said about that Monday session. Since it's an equipped squat and an equipped bench, you know, first of all, if anybody listening hasn't done an equipped training before, there's some things that I can tell you about. First of all, it takes a lot longer. It takes longer to warm up. You have to warm up to heavier weights. Then you have to get the equipment on. And then between each set, you're going to want to take like 10, even 15-minute rest breaks on something like a squat. And that sounds like absurdly long, but let me tell you, when you do a heavy equipped squat, first of all, it takes a lot longer just to do it because the process of wrapping your knees and getting all the stuff on and getting under the bar, and the bar is so much heavier than it normally is. Like you're going to want that 15 minutes after that rep, so it takes a lot longer. So an equipped workout like what you just described, Bryce, it's only 8 working sets really, but it still will take, what, 2.5 hours, 3 hours to do.
Oh, at least.
Yeah.
Like there were a lot of times where I would, like I listen to a lot of music when I train, and I use music pretty heavily in my training to like help get me in the right mindset or whatever. I'm sure a lot of people can relate. But I would put on a song that I wanted to squat to, and then start wrapping my knees. And by the time I got under the bar, it would be the next song. So I would have to like proactively go a song before the one I wanted to squat to pretty regularly because of, and I mean, I was wrapping my own knees loosely because I'm not good at it yet, but still just the amount of time, the preparation, like you wrap your knees, you get your straps up, you rip your wrists, you waddle yourself under the bar, you get set. And yeah, it's quite a production.
Yeah, for sure it is, and I've done workouts like that though. And to be honest, I kind of enjoy them because so much of the training that we do is kind of the other character, which for you in this last training block, that was like the rest of your week. Like, you hit a heavier single, but there's a lot of volume, and that's kind of what my training style has become more known for, is like this tremendous amount of volume, which, we can talk about. That's not really what it is, but, everybody has tendencies, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these high volume workouts. So it's kind of nice to have a workout where you come in, it's a really slow pace, and you focus on, a couple sets, a couple lifts, and take some long rest breaks in there. It's pretty enjoyable.
Yeah. And just being able to put that much focus into a few lifts and not having it be spread out to the point where you're kind of hammering away at triple after triple after triple after triple. It's like, okay, we need 3 good singles here, and then, whatever work set of a couple of reps, and then we're on. I also think doing it that way was really good practice for meet day. Having the equipped squat and equipped bench right after each other, from like a psychological standpoint and from maybe a physical preparation standpoint as well, to be able to do that was like almost running a mini equipped meet every Monday. So when I got to the meet, I think a lot of people, as long as somebody told me when to wrap my knees, everything is good. I think a lot of people get to the meet and they've only ever done it like once every 3 weeks. They're in their suit, and then every other week they're in their bench shirt. And I think being able to understand, like, okay, this is how I get into my stuff every time. It's the same. It's practice. And I think that kind of stuff helped me a lot to even just keep my cool in my first full equipped meet.
So what kind of protocols were we training up to that? We were doing a series of 3 singles followed by a rep set, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Which I also think is kind of I'll toot my own horn, I guess, right? But I think that's a good way to go about equipped training, because one of the problems of training and equipment is, how do you develop that technical mastery and the technical proficiency? Let's take the bench, for example. Like, if I ask you to do a triple, it's going to take, you're going to use a lighter weight, right? So now it's a weight that you're going to either not be able to touch with at all, or you're going to have to really, really struggle to touch with it, in which case you won't really be able to do a triple with it, because if one rep is taking you 10 or 15 seconds, you're not going to do 3.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So you'll have to use an even lighter weight, which won't touch,
Yeah.
So it kind of becomes this problem of doing rep work. Like, there are benefits to doing rep work, but the drawback is that it negatively impacts your ability to do it with competition style technique. So my intent behind doing 3 heavier singles in the equipment was that these should be weights that are heavy enough that we can squat to depth, we can touch our benches, hopefully, and it's always a battle, right?
Yeah.
And practice those higher level technical things. Now, the drawback to that is that doing singles in that way really limits your overall. So that's why I wanted to follow it up with a rep set, is that it helps you to kind of feel out the groove of the equipment. So we didn't opt to do things like board work in the shirt and things like that. Kind of put you on the spot here since we're talking about it face to face, but what did you think of that? Like, how did you feel about it? What were some of the strengths and weaknesses that you felt about, kind of living it?
You mean with the strategy that we used, or the board work?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
the strategy that we used, and also the fact that it kind of requires us to neglect other potential strategies.
Okay. So first off, I really liked there were times where I was struggling to touch with my singles, and then I was actually closer to touching with a set of 5 by the end of it, because I learned that holding your breath for 5 reps in a shirt is really, really tough. And by the last rep, I'm reefing it down to my chest just to try and get the set done. And that sort of made some things click to like, okay, that's how aggressively I need to bring the bar down to my chest, and help me figure out some of those things. I found the rep work was really, really valuable for learning the groove. And then, obviously you're going to get a pretty good strength building stimulus from doing a set of 3, 4, 5, whatever in the gear. And then as well, I think it was a really good thing to be doing the heavier singles, so I could practice more sport form, like you said, squatting to depth and benching to the chest and all that kind of stuff. We're close to the chest many times in my case.
So it's a forever battle, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I really saw too many drawbacks. I think if I was in much tighter equipment, it could be really taxing to be working up that heavy all the time, because the amount of weight that you need to touch, like you watch guys like Stian Walgermo, and he's got that window of like 10 kilos between whatever 275 and 285, or 285 and 295, where he can touch and press. So I think to be working in there all the time makes it hard to get like an 8, because in order to get something to touch, it's going to be a 9, 9.5 if we're talking in terms of RPE. So I think maybe for somebody more experienced and somebody who's better in the equipment, wears tighter stuff, that could be a bit of a dilemma, but easily solved by having your training gear and your competition gear, which most guys at that level do anyways.
Well, it becomes another training variable altogether, right? Like,
yeah,
it's another thing that guys periodize. Like at this stage of the training, I'm wearing, looser fit stuff, older stuff. Like it was to the point, and I'm OCD about stuff like this, which is why I would do it. But like when I was competing in equipment, I would track how many wears I had in each bench shirt.
Oh wow.
So if I knew that, like my bench felt the best when I had this kind of shirt on wear 4, then I could try to set that up ahead of time so that wear 4 happened at the meet. Which,
why does that not surprise me?
I know, right? Like that's such a Mike T way of doing things, I guess.
But I'm sure it was incredibly effective.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's better than not, and it certainly certainly soothed my I don't know, just compulsion to try to control everything, I guess. But
yeah,
it was definitely how I did it, and if I picked up equipment again, that I would still do it that way. Which, now that I'm talking about it, is kind of similar to how we set up the block structure for your training going into this meet, and how we've been doing the block structure for your training for a little while now.
Yeah.
For example, we've kind of set up your training blocks, and we found out that your lifts continue to improve for 8 weeks. And at 8 weeks, there's a peak. So now we know that about you as a lifter. So we've set it up so that meet happens on the 8th week when you're supposed to be at a peak performance. And I think learning those things about a lifter, learning those things about equipment, I guess, if we're talking about the equipped sphere, um, that's important. That's an important part of the individualization process.
Yeah.
This whole notion of time to peak has been really illuminating for me, because you hear a lot of coaches talk about, training blocks that are 3 weeks or 4 weeks or however long. And that's kind of a common way to do it. But as I've actually measured athletes and figured out like how long do they continue to improve uh, relative to the same stimulus, I'm not finding that many in the 3 and 4 week range. Actually, I would say very few in the 3 week range. 4 weeks is not uncommon, but it's not the most common either. I find that probably the most common time frame is 5 and 6 weeks. And then we'll have guys like you who are going 8 weeks. I've had a couple people go 10 or 11 weeks. Now, 10 or 11 weeks responding to the same stimulus, Now,
Yeah.
if you're deloading after 3 or 4, I'm not sure that that's the best way to go about it, at least for that individual athlete. If you're an athlete that does peak after 3 or 4 weeks, then that's what you need to do.
Yeah. Well, I think going through this process as an athlete has sort of taught me a lot about how I'm coaching my athletes too, because looking at this notion of time to peak has been like an interesting thing for me as well. Even as somebody who generally writes 4-week blocks of training, to do 2 4-week blocks and then 2 weeks of the next block and then deload, because athlete X, Y, or Z will, even with a varied stimulus, I see general trends in specific athletes where it's like, okay, we were really good to this point, and then we got to these doubles and it kind of fell apart, so we need to dial back here, and timing things out more individually for the athlete. I think it's a huge concept.
Yeah. And that example right there brings to mind an example that I've got. I've got an athlete now who really responds well to training when we're training in the, I don't know, I'd say 4 to 6 rep range, 4 to 7 rep range. But whenever we get into those higher intensities, his time to peak gets really short, and the response isn't quite as robust as what we would be used to seeing. So, I mean, to put somebody like that on, say, a stock program that has a significant amount of time devoted to the powerlifter rep range of, doubles and triples, that doesn't work for him. And I know it doesn't work because we've tried that too. And those meet cycles haven't gone so well. So like learning that individual response, peaking for meets is a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we get caught up in the taper strategy, or, like we kind of consider that those last 2 or 3 weeks, that's the peaking portion, but depending on the athlete, I think that peaking portion can last a lot longer than that. It can be 8 weeks, it can be 10 weeks, and if it's going to last that long, you need to be sure about what you're having that athlete do and have them do something that is producing results for them throughout that entire period.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to be done in that period of training, I think.
Yeah. I also think, like you mentioned there, taper strategy, I think, is something that very much needs to be individualized, because I've seen over and over again these guys who test incredibly well just during training. It's like, okay, we're gonna do an AMRAP here, we're gonna do a mock meet, just no taper, just go for it on your last day of training. And these guys are, in some cases, consistently performing better than after a full taper leading into a meet. So trying to individualize, okay, this guy needs a more aggressive taper in terms of doing more work during his taper period, and this guy needs pretty much a full week off. But being able to learn that kind of stuff about the athletes, I think, is something that's often overlooked, because I think, and even myself, I was guilty of this for a long time. I like, there's a taper. This is the taper. Right. But it's like, okay, let's rethink that. Maybe we need to have different tapers. We need to have different programs for people. Why wouldn't we need to have different tapers, right?
Right, and that's not so easy to figure out either. Like,
No.
I think from a training perspective, it's maybe even a little bit easier because you're getting, a weekly checkpoint of some sort of progress measure, or if you're not, you should be.
Yeah.
You know, so there's feedback every week, like, yes, this is working, or no, it's not working, you know,
Yeah.
and so you get a pretty robust indication. But for a taper, you know, you take an athlete who's competing, let's say even 4 or 5 times a year, that's still only 4 or 5 checkpoints that you're getting in a year.
Yeah.
And oh well, this meet, you know, I had to do a big water cut, and so that maybe affected things. And this
Hmm.
meet, I had to travel for it, and this meet, you know, you know, my kid was just born, or you know, whatever's
Yeah.
going on. So there's a lot of other, uh, I guess, life factors and even competition factors that can kind of blend in there with that tapering strategy.
Yeah.
You know, kind of clouding that issue.
Yeah. It's a really one and done kind of thing. You know, like you said, programming, you have this build up,
Right.
and then this build up and this taper is like you do it once and it either works or it doesn't, kind of thing, or it works to a certain magnitude, right? But it's
Right.
like then that's it and it's done, and you have another umpteen weeks until you get to try something else. So
Right.
it's a pretty critical piece.
Yeah, definitely not an easy thing to figure out. So I want to have a conversation with you about some things that we may not see completely eye to eye on, just because I think this stuff is interesting, and it's interesting on a number of levels. One, hopefully, talking about something where our opinions differ slightly is informative, but
Mm-hmm.
also that, you know, I think it demonstrates that you can disagree with somebody about some obscure training thing and you know, not turn into a jerk. You know, so hopefully our little social experiment here goes well.
Yeah, stay
uh,
civil.
so how important do you feel that core work is to your training? Let,
So
and maybe we should define what core work means as well.
sure. Um, I think that in a lot of cases, there needs to be more corrective exercises regularly prescribed. And I wouldn't limit it necessarily to core work, but I would say things like, different shoulder balancing strategies. So whether that's, extra rotator cuff work, even just being conscious of people's posture and things like that. And yeah, traditional core work, looking at like things like dead bugs and bird dogs are a couple of favorites of mine, because again, we're teaching the body to kind of stabilize the trunk while the limbs move, which is ideally very transferable to our powerlifting movements, and teaching people what that should feel like. I know there's been like a huge discussion lately of this whole like glute activation or this activation, and no, it's activated, no, it's not, or it needs to be in a better leverage position. But I think there's something to be said for even just teaching people what it should feel like. So breaking it down to the point where there's less external stimulus and saying, okay, this is what it should feel like. This is this is the sensation that we're looking for, or the position we're trying to achieve while all these other big parts are moving. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think the part where you and I might not see eye to eye or might disagree slightly is that you prescribe a once a week GPP session to take care of a lot of this stuff. Whereas I would prescribe it throughout each training session at the day. And then at the end of each session, I have people do a sort of prehab corrective exercise routine based on, whatever their needs might be.
Okay, so there's not as much disagreement there as maybe there seems. Like, I do tend to prescribe a once a week GPP session, um, but I find that that's mostly contingent on people and their schedules. You know, so
Mm-hmm.
if you, first of all, like we mentioned earlier with the higher volume workouts, those workouts can be pretty long.
Yeah.
And so if they only have the time to do the main work in a given session, then we'll kind of shut that GPP off to another day, which tends to be kind of the standard scenario for most people.
Mm-hmm.
But then other people are in a slightly different scenario where they don't have the time to add another day of GPP training. So they would prefer to break it up and distribute it across the training sessions of the week, you know,
Mm-hmm.
do it at the end or whatever. And I'm actually fine with that as well. My question then comes to you. So from a coaching perspective, as a coach,
Mhm.
How do you make those assessments? Do you have a specific tool that you like to use or anything like that?
A lot of times it's based on what I've seen in other athletes. A lot of times I think looking at the way that they move and looking at their technique, you can see a lot of these deficiencies. Um, the feet arch collapsing and the knees coming in, or the back caving, or in another scenario or a number of other scenarios, it can be a reactive thing to an injury or a chronic condition occurring. Then there's usually a sort of a laundry list of like, okay, we have a lot of this like sort of AC impingement or whatever's going on. So we need to look at, okay, how can we address this in the shoulders? And like anything else, it's a lot of cycling through different movements, finding out which one's going to, work right for the athlete's specific condition, and then just really hammering that.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
a lot of times it's reactive to some sort of condition coming up, some sort of pain or injury.
So you're using basically coaching experience and knowledge that you've acquired over the years to make these sort of assessments. You're not doing anything like an FMS or anything like that then?
No, no. And a lot of times it's just, okay, as a general population, we can look at, 80 or 90% of the population that all have similar postural dysfunctions. Believe that, 80 to 90% of the population are going to have similar dysfunctions in a number of the main joints in similar ways. So we start off with a sort of a general prescription for a lot of this stuff, and then tweak it as we go down the road based on the athlete's reaction to it, and like I said, cropping up of conditions.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. And um, just kind of a way to put something a little more concrete in terms of example with this. Um, let's talk about, say, upper back work or rows.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of people that start out working with me are surprised that I don't include a lot of rowing work in the main programming,
Mhm.
you know, especially some people have heard that you need to have like a 1-to-1 ratio between pushing and pulling. And, so they're really concerned about this lack of rowing. Now, um, I have had athletes with shoulder issues, and regardless of what you believe about imbalances and things like that, I've had some athletes that do rows and their shoulders feel better.
Mhm.
So we're going to do rows. And in those
Yeah.
cases, yeah, absolutely. And I've had some athletes that I've gone as far as doing probably not quite a 1-to-1 ratio, but getting pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio
Yeah.
with pushing. But those are athletes that have a history of having the need, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, that's definitely not my default position with programming. And my stance on that has been that there's a ton of lifters at all levels who have been able to tolerate, pushing. They get a little bit of pulling from GPP or maybe a supplemental movement here and there. And
Mhm.
then deadlifting, a deadlift does train those muscles,
Yeah.
although it's not the same movement mechanic,
Mhm.
it does generate some tension in those muscles.
Yeah.
So my experience has been that for, I guess I would say most people, um, that's sufficient. So do you then start people from a position of including the prehab stuff in there, kind of based on what you see, like more of I guess, a shotgun approach? Like, this is what works for most people, so we're just going to kind of shotgun that at you from a prehab perspective, and then hopefully that will, well, not hopefully, but then you'll narrow it down to something more effective as the needs arise.
Yeah. So generally, I mean, that's how I do it is going to be to prescribe, here's most people's issue. Let's see if this can keep us from that issue. And if the issue never crops up, then we stick with that approach. And I think it's interesting that you point out that you generally have athletes doing a lot more pressing than pulling, and a lot of people have this idea that there needs to be a lot of pulling. I think as long as you can press properly, and keep balance and keep your back tight and keep things in the right position, then I think pressing is going to build all those stabilizing muscles in the exact right way that you need to press.
Yeah.
Is when people have, terrible posture all day, or this, that, or the other thing. And some people have terrible posture and press all day and don't have any issues. But if we end up with issues, then sometimes we need to look at, how to better get that person into, or how to get that person into a better position for their pressing. So, I mean, the end goal is to obviously be able to perform the competition movements better and stay away from injury. And I don't necessarily, like you, I don't think that, just doing a bunch of rows is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I wouldn't just shotgun that out there, Well, I think that's about all the time that we have. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat with me. Can you tell us a little bit about people that want to connect with you? Where can they connect with you at?
For sure. So I'm Calgary Barbell, pretty much anywhere you want to find me. We've got a YouTube channel that we're trying to put out a lot of really cool content, really informative stuff, and also hopefully fairly entertaining. We're on Instagram, Calgary Barbell, and you can check out calgarybarbell.com. There's a contact form on there to get a hold of me, or if you want to email me directly, calgarybarbell@gmail.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely would highly recommend your YouTube content. You guys are doing some really cool stuff, really great stuff there.
Thank you.
Again, thanks for sitting with me and chatting. Thanks for disagreeing with me on some stuff. It was a fun conversation. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Reactive Training Systems.